to help organizations with their surveys and how they could do market research surveys to design and figure out what's going on. He's always been somewhat skeptical about using ranking, prioritizing. Sometimes you'll get a survey and it'll say rank from 1 to 10. What are your favorite reasons you chose whatever it might be, a certain kind of vehicle or what have you. And he's always been very suspicious of that, skeptical of it, because it doesn't seem to work very well. But as Dr. Bennekom, received his bachelor's degree from Bowdoin College in history and economics, and then he went on to get his Master of Business Administration and his Doctor of Business Administration from Boston University, and he specialized in organizational operations management with that. And in addition to his survey work that he does, survey consultancy, he teaches at service organizations and quality management at several colleges and Boston area schools. I ran across his work on one of the conservative websites. I think it may have been Suzanne Downing's Must Read Alaska. She had an article about him, and I started doing a little reading, read some of his, couple of his articles that he had, and then heard him actually on Michael Duke's show. He was on Michael Duke's and was very impressed with what he had to say. And so I would ask all of you to join me in extending a very warm District 6 welcome to Dr. Fred Bennekom.
All right, so I think the microphone got tossed to me. You can hear me okay, I gather? All right, I heard a little mumble in the background. Great. Thanks for having me here. Of course, I was hoping when I was asked to speak that you were going to buy me a plane ticket to go visit the Kenai Peninsula a second time. I haven't been to Kenai in 3 years, and I was hoping to have a chance to come back. And I say this as a way of leading into my biography a bit, because I am, as you just heard, I am a professional surveyor and survey trainer. My bulk of my business is training people on how to run survey programs better. So you can blame me for all those emails you get asking you to take surveys. I'm joking there, but maybe I've had an effect. But 3 years ago, I did 3 workshops for ANTHC. So I was training epidemiologists for some of their surveys. So I got to spend 2.5 weeks in Anchorage after my wife and I took the Inside Passage cruise up from Vancouver up to Seward. So I had a wonderful time, and I'm hoping to get back soon, not during mud season, of course. So you heard of, I'll probably talk a little bit more about me as I go along, but this is about sort of the good and bad about how ranked choice voting is going to change elections, not just superficially, but to a very large extent. And we're still relatively new in this country for this thing. It's only been implemented in a few places, and you folks are the guinea pigs now for ranked choice voting combined with the jungle primary. And what that means, well, I guess we're going to find out. That's why I use the word guinea pigs. So let me get into this. So what I'm going to talk about as an example, because one thing about ranked choice voting is it's really hard to understand. And even one of my articles on my website had an error in it, which Kathy found for me and pointed out to me, and I was suitably embarrassed. But what I'm going to talk about here is using as a real example rather than a made up example, because it's better to do that way, is the Maine 2nd Congressional District election in 2018, where the incumbent Republican lost to Democratic challenger. And that was one of the first examples of ranked choice voting used, I believe, in a federal office. They adopted ranked choice voting in Maine in part because the Republican governor, LePage, won twice with less than a majority of the vote. So that was part of what got it kicked into Maine for 2018. So I'll talk about, as I said here, how this is going to change election processes and electioneering strategy. That's probably the most important one, and frankly, the one that is still so ill-defined. But what got my attention, and this is the introduction you heard, I am a professional surveyor and a survey trainer. And as was said, I in my workshops, I tell people don't use ranked choice or forced ranking questions. And the reason why is that they're prone to two things. One is respondent annoyance, second, respondent error. Annoyance means the respondent gets there and goes, what am I supposed to do? You want me to rank? How do I set what if I get the order wrong? I mean, they just don't know what to do, so they walk away. You get a very high abandonment rate from surveys that use forced ranking questions. They're very hard for the survey vendors to set up so that they have a good ease of use. And if you take surveys, you may encounter them and you may have experienced it. They're better than they used to be, but they're still not great. Respondent error means that the respondents don't enter their answers correctly. And they're prone to that because, again, the instructions are a little bit complicated. So I asked myself, why are these being pushed? Why is this survey technique being pushed to use in election? That got me scratching my head. And that's when I started to dig into this after the Maine 2018 election. And this might shock you guys, by the way. You know, I'm from Massachusetts. One of the, if not the bluest states in the country. Our state Senate has 3 Republican senators out of 40. That's 7.5% Republicans. Okay, so when I say that we are a one-party state, we really are. Ranked choice voting was on our ballot as a ballot question in 2020 and was soundly defeated. And frankly, as a Republican, I almost thought about voting for it because it can't hurt us anymore in my state. All it could do was help. But I wanted to ask a question: why use these in an election? Well, first we have to ask, what is a good election system? What are the criteria for evaluating and choosing an election system? And the very first thing you have to understand is there's no such thing as a perfect system. I tell people in my survey workshops, there is no such thing as a perfect survey. That's our goal, but you never achieve it because there's too much noise in the system from respondents and everything. There's just no one perfect way. So the question is, how can we get what's the best system? And there we're balancing advantages against disadvantages. And I would argue that these are the criteria that we should use in evaluating an election system. Is it fair? Meaning, does the most preferred candidate win most of the time? And we can use a sports analogy here. A well-designed sport ensures that the best team wins most of the time. Sometimes they don't. A fluke thing happens, and the team that wasn't the best on that day can still wind up winning. So that's fairness. Simplicity. Can the voters understand and know how to use the system? Do they know how to cast a ballot? Transparency. Can citizens understand how the election outcome was arrived at and have faith in the election integrity? And I wrote this slide before 2020, so this is obviously a huge issue, election integrity. When you have the president of the United States saying 6 months in advance that the elections this fall are not going to be valid, that really casts some doubt on election integrity in our country. Sad to say. Cost. Obviously, we want to minimize cost, but still achieve the other criteria. So cost to me is probably the least important one of all these. And finally, what's the long-term impact? When we choose a system for electing officials, how does it change electioneering going forward? The law of unintended consequences is one of the most immutable laws there is. Remember McCain-Feingold 20 years ago that was going to eliminate money in our elections and going to make everything wonderful? Well, no, it just drove the money into 527 funds. So, we really should be thinking about these and not acting in a knee-jerk way. And one of the real gripes I have with the RCV proponents is they sell this thing as the magic elixir that is going to fix everything. And I've heard, you've heard my bio. I was on Michael Duke's show, so I've heard a little bit about how it was sold in Alaska in conjunction with eliminating dark money, which really wasn't about eliminating dark money. But it is so grossly oversold that that's what really infuriates me, because there's a political wedge factor coming in here. Let's not kid ourselves. This is not, people pushing this aren't doing it because they want to have fair elections. They want to win elections. So, here are the claims. This screenshot is from the ranked choice voting website in my state prior to 2020. It's no longer up like this, but this gives you a sense of the overselling and what I'm about to drive into. You know, they talk about the reasons for ranked choice voting: simple, fair, and easy. Well, they say it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Really? Is it really as easy as 1, 2, 3? Talk about overselling. They also say it ensures the winning candidate has, quote, majority support. But a majority of what? And I'm going to show you a majority of what coming up in a couple of slides. It also says that similar candidates can't cancel each other out and spoil the election. They claim it eliminates strategic voting, but what it really does is create strategic electioneering. So, you know, you're balancing here, you're squishing the balloon and something else pops out. So notice they never talk about transparency. And to me, transparency in an election is one of the most important things. And they never talk about that because it is about as opaque an election system as you can possibly have. So the key takeaway I'd like to push is this idea that ranked choice voting is a get out the vote strategy. Now, it may not be in your case with the jungle primary. That throws a different twist in here, but I believe that ranked choice voting in general is a way to try to get as many people to the polls to vote for fringe candidates, and then for choice number 2, they vote for the right candidate. And the people who devised this system, I believe, are pushing it thinking, well, you know, Republicans are too stupid. They won't figure it out for 2 or 3 election cycles, and that they're going to have a first mover advantage. So that's where I say, and I am a fellow Republican, I wore my red today, that we need to be ahead of the curve, so to speak, and not get caught flat-footed, as has happened, for example, with McCain-Feingold, if you're old enough or involved enough to remember what happened back in 2002 midterms. So what I'm showing on here is the ballot for the Maine 2nd Congressional District in 2018. There were 4 candidates. The incumbent was Bruce Poliquin at the bottom. And by the way, I do have a Maine connection from my college, as you heard there, and I got to correct you. It's pronounced Bowden, not Bowden. Mistake everybody makes, but so be it. We live with it. Bruce Poliquin was the incumbent. Jared Golden was the Democratic challenger who wound up winning. And then there were 2 fringe left-wing candidates, Tiffany Bond and William Hoare. And here's the ballot. And notice there are 4 candidates and a write-in. So we go out to 5 choices. We have this 5x5 matrix. Oy. Here are the results of the election. Maine Election Bureau actually puts up on their spreadsheet, on their site, a spreadsheet with the election results. And also they include spreadsheets with all of the ballots cast. So I have gone out there and with the ballots cast, I downloaded all those spreadsheets. And each row is an individual voter's ballots that they cast. And so I recreated the results from this election on my own using brute force Excel, which was kind of fun because it was a lot of rows in my 300,000 rows in my spreadsheet. This is a spreadsheet of the results. Now you can go out there and see this. They don't actually show you the math. They only give the numbers in the spreadsheet are all hard coded as numbers. So I took this is only part of the spreadsheet. It took me about an hour to recreate the spreadsheet so I understood the math. So here we see for the election in November of 2018, William Hoare got 6,800 votes and so forth. You can read all the totals there. And it sure looks like when we look at this that Poliquin won. He got 46% of the vote versus Jared Golden, who got 45.6% of the vote. So looks like Poliquin won, but he didn't get to that magical 50% that the majoritarians tell us we must reach in order to have a valid election result. So let's pursue this a little more. So to get to that majority result, and I put majority in quotes here for a reason, we have to look at the second choice votes for the candidates who wound up at the bottom of the list. In this case, Bill Hoare got 2% of the vote, and Tiffany Bond got just about 6% of the vote. So those 2 candidates wind up getting eliminated. And in this case, the way Maine is set up, we can eliminate them both at once and do one round of looking at second choice votes, because if we eliminated Bill Hoare, he got 2% of the vote. You normally eliminate the candidate who got the least number of votes. Bill Hoare with 2%, even if all of those votes went to either Poliquin or Golden, they wouldn't be over 50%. So we can bunch them together, save some time, and eliminate the bottom two. So that's what we're going to see coming up on the next slide. And if I'm losing you, by the way, if your eyes glaze over looking at this, it helps prove my point about transparency. Okay. So there were a total of 289,000 votes cast in the election. And we're eliminating Bill Hoare and Tiffany Bond. They get the thumbs down because they came in last. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at these 23,427 ballots that were cast for those two people and look at what those voters, who those voters chose as their second choice. Okay? Only those 23,000 ballots. And when we look at those, Jared Golden got 10,427, 69% of the 15,000 ballots that got used in the second round. So he winds up with a total of 142,440. Poliquin got 31% of the ballots that came into the second round, for a grand total now of 138,931. Now, some of you were looking, saying, well, wait a second, you said 23,427. Now you're saying 15,174. If you're thinking that, then I didn't lose you, and I pat myself on the head, but that distinction is going to be made clear in a moment. So here are the results after round two. Golden wins. He has 142,440 versus Poliquin 138,931. So Golden wins with 49.2% of the votes. Wait a second. No one got 50%. Why did Golden win? And the reason is the 8,253 ballots that were disqualified. The 8,253 is the difference between the 23,427 that came into the next round from Bond and Hoare and the 15,174 that were valid ballots in the second round. Okay, so that's the distinction between the 23,427 and the 15,174. Lots of numbers here, I know. And again, this is transparency, the transparency thing coming out here. So what were these 8,253? What were they? Well, here we go. Here's the analysis of it, how we manufacture. I want to make sure I didn't screw up my build. Nope, I didn't. When we're looking at how we manufacture a majority. If we look in the very first round, the votes originally cast, there were 6,453 ballots that were disqualified right off the bat. 435 were overvotes, meaning the 435 voters voted for two people as their first choice. That's an overvote, that's eliminated. That's done today. There were 6,000 people were undervotes. They didn't vote for anyone in this office, so they're eliminated. So 2% of the ballots were eliminated right in the very first round, 6,453. Now in the second round, of the 23,427 ballots that came into the second round from Tiffany Bond and Bill Hoare, 8,253 were eliminated because of these problems in the ballot. 98 of those ballots voted for two people for second choice. So they were overvotes. And again, this was for their second choice. 7,820 were undervotes, meaning 7,800 people did not, of those ballots, did not make a second choice vote. 335 are what are called exhausted, means 335 voters voted for Jared Golden number 1 and Bill Hoare number 2, or vice versa. So one of them had already been eliminated, so those ballots were quote unquote exhausted, a great euphemism. That's how we get these numbers. So notice here, 35% of the ballots that went into the second round were disqualified. So the results after round 2, after we eliminate those ballots, the 8253, this is how Jared Golden got his manufactured majority of 50.6 versus Polacum with 49.4. So the way we get to the majority is by eliminating disqualified ballots. And if you look at an election like the New York City mayoral election that occurred just recently, where there was something like 12 candidates, the number of ballots in the final tally that were used are a fraction of the number originally cast because of all the disqualified, quote unquote, disqualified ballots. So this is tough to understand. Can you, if you were able to understand all this, kudos to you. I'm left brain analytic type. It took me a full hour to crunch these numbers and figure out the math. But if you couldn't, that's not a value judgment. You're a normal person. And this gets to my issue of fairness and transparency. Can the normal voter understand how the election was decided? So let's look at the claims as simple and easy. This is the 8,235 ballots that went into the second round. 1/3 of them literally were disqualified, mostly for undervoting. If it's simple and easy, how come 33% of those voters didn't make a second choice vote? Now, it was the first time this was used in Maine, so you would expect there to be more problems the first time than the second time. But still, that's pretty bad. And I want to point out at the bottom here, these undervoters followed the rules. There was nothing that said you had to make a second choice. So they followed the rules here. Their ballots were not included in the denominator to determine the election result. A point I make up above, and I'm going to show you one in a moment. The state of Maine had an 11-slide instructional slide deck on how to cast a vote. If it's so damn easy, why do you need an 11-slide PowerPoint deck to understand how to cast a ballot? That's kind of proof of the opposite, isn't it? Okay, so, and by the way, of the nearly 300,000 ballots cast, I went and crunched, again, I crunched the spreadsheet with all of them. Over 30,000 or 60,000, pardon me, ballots cast did not have a second choice. But the only ones disqualified were the ones that came into the second round, and there was no second choice for those candidates who had been eliminated. Is it fair that you're selectively disqualifying people who didn't make a second choice? We can argue about that at 5 o'clock over multiple beers in the bar. That's one of those, there's no absolute right answer, but it's a real fairness question you can ask. So here, I mentioned the 11-slide deck that the state of Maine had. Here you go. This is one of the slides in here, and it was saying basically how are ballots handled if they're flawed, if the respondent screwed up and how they made choice. And what we see here in this fictional example was a voter voted for Superman as both his first and second choice, and then voted for Fred Flintstone, my favorite for obvious reasons, as third choice. Well, you know what the state of Maine would do? That third choice would be escalated or elevated to a second choice vote. They don't say it in the slide deck, I don't believe it at all, but if you did not make a first choice selection, your second choice was automatically bumped up to a first choice. I'll say that again. If a voter did not make a first choice selection, the second choice was treated as a first choice by the algorithm in the computer that calculated the results. And I know this for a fact because the only way I could replicate the official results of the election was to do that in my brute force method with the slide deck. So this is scary stuff. Who decides this? Who decides how flawed ballots will be handled? And imagine if this ballot decided the election. Again, fairness, transparency, election integrity. How would you feel if that ballot decided your election? Either way, whether the right person won or the wrong person, it's a crappy way to elect people. And we might be thinking back to the 2000 election in Florida with the dimple chads as we try to infer what the voter meant to tell us as we get out our magnifying glass and look for the hanging chads and the dimple chads. And a lot of you remember this, I'm sure. So one bit of statement I will make for you, and maybe you've already talked about this morning. I came in towards the end of the last presentation. I don't know if I heard this or not, but there is undoubtedly a commission that is going to decide how the ranked choice election is going to be held. What are the rules of the game? I could never find that out publicly for the state of Maine, yet I know somebody came up with it, but I can't find it. You folks need to get people on that commission and really be a hawk in looking for what rules they have come up with, because we know what rules they'll come up with if nobody's watching. Okay, so that is one of the biggest takeaways I can give you. Watch that commission. Now, transparency. We don't have faith in elections unless we know how the elections were decided. We look at third world dictators all the time and just laugh at these stupid citizens who actually believe these results. Well, aren't we the same? Now, I would argue, why should we have faith in a system that the creator, Fair Vote, doesn't even understand themselves? And Fair Vote is the far left of center organization that has been pushing RCV. And if you read my articles on my website, one of them, I spoke to this because they are so, at the time, they were very non-transparent about their involvement in it. They hid their involvement, which really I think is very telling. But if you think about what I just described with the state of Maine election, the decision was made with first place votes and second place votes. Third place votes are never used. If you look at the process where we eliminate the candidate who got the least votes, look at the second place votes of those ballots, reassign them, we go through that iterative process, all of that decision making is done with second place votes. Eventually you get down to two candidates, which means you either have a winner, a majority, or you wind up in a bizarre tie, and the obvious tiebreaker is who got the most first place votes. So why are we complicating the ballot with third, fourth, and fifth place choices? I have yet to have gotten a straight answer, because I cannot see conceptually how the third choice votes would ever be used in an election, except perhaps to break a tie, or it allows them to play games with these flawed ballots and elevating a flawed ballot third place vote up to a second place. This really creeps me out, though, that the people who created the system either don't understand it or do understand it and are purposely not talking about it as a way to play with the system. I don't know. I'm going to skip over that slide. I meant to take it out, but I wanted to get to this one here in the interest of time. By the way, I can come back to it, but I wanted to give time for Q&A. Here is my evaluation, Fred Van Bennekom's evaluation of the pros and cons of ranked choice voting. And I try to be even-handed here. I'm not saying that ranked choice voting doesn't have its benefits. It does have some benefits, but you can see I have a lot of cons for this. Fair, I would think, I agree that majority support makes it fair, but are we really to believe that somebody who got 49.5% doesn't command authority as a legitimate winner? This magic thing about a majority kind of has me scratching my head. And the cons, the majority is manufactured through ballot disqualification. Some voters, quote unquote, get a second bite of the apple. The one that bothers me is, why does a second place vote count the same as a first place vote? I don't know what market researcher who would say, when they're researching customer preferences, would say a second choice preference should have the same weight as a first choice preference. You married the person who you like the best, not the person you like second best, if you will. We can come up with all kinds of silly analogies here. And I personally believe a runoff is a better way, because it focuses the mind on the two candidates who are left. And this is sometimes called instant runoff voting. Well, yeah, but it's not really, because you don't just have two people on the ballot. Simple and easy. You saw what I said already about it, but one other point I'll make, I haven't made here, is the ranked choice voting process, this looking at the second place votes, can't happen until all the first choice ballots are counted. Why? We don't know who has come in last until all the ballots have been counted. And think about, the New York mayoral election. They were, because of our COVID related ballot rules, there were lots of mail-in ballots, and they were accepted if they arrived 7, 10, 14 days after the election. You can't start the ranked choice voting process until all of those have been counted. So we're creating an even greater delay in the determination of who won the election when we add in RCV. That's something that isn't noticed. Okay, and I was having a chat with one of your state senators, Mike Showers, about this about a month or so ago, and he kind of went, wow, yeah, that's right. And of course, the RCV proponents are never going to talk about this. Saving money, come on. And then transparency, there's no pro here. And then one of the real issues to me is, how are the second place votes tallied? Who does this? Well, it doesn't happen in the local municipality. In the state of Maine, every town generated an electronic file with the ballots showing first place, first, second, third, fourth choices and so forth. And those files were then sent to the Secretary of State, where they were loaded into a program and the algorithm was run. Ooh, okay. Do we trust the program? Better make sure it's been independently verified. How are misplaced ballots handled? Who decides this? Is that reported? In the state of Maine, it wasn't reported. And then finally, here's a real good one. How are recounts done? Imagine trying to do a recount with this ranked choice voting logic. It really becomes, all you're going to do is run the computer program a second time. A recount is effectively nil, or a null issue at this point. Now, I thought about your model. You have a, whoops, I wanted that coming up last, because I added the slide in here. You folks have this new twist where you start out with the jungle primary, if I understand this right, which are going to take however many people are in that jungle primary and winnow it down to 4 top candidates. And then you have the ranked choice election from the 4 top candidates. And I would argue that that process that I've highlighted there, the jungle primary, cutting back to the 4 top candidates, regardless of party, that this almost guarantees a ranked choice voting general election, because you're very likely to have 4 candidates where you're very unlikely to have one of those 4 candidates to pull 50%. Because they're not going to be real fringe candidates going in there for the 3rd and 4th choices. So you're almost guaranteed to have a ranked choice election. Very unlikely to have somebody break 50 on the first round. So, I asked myself, being a cynical son of a bitch, what was the electioneering strategy that was envisioned by the people pushing this as the way that they were going to win elections? And my guess, and this is my guess, is they want to have exactly 3 candidates in the jungle primary. So let's say you're a Democrat and you have 3 Democrats, 3 liberals on the ballot. You have your goal is to get all 3 of those into the ranked through the jungle primary. If you have more than 3, they're going to dilute each other, and you're less likely to have 3 candidates, maybe even 2, getting into the ranked choice. So the idea is, for your political party, your political ideology, you want 3 of the 4 candidates in the general election to be from your ideology. Because those candidates, those fringe candidates, the ones who aren't the top vote getters, the lesser ones, are likely to bring people to the polls who wouldn't otherwise vote. So in the general RCV model out there, you want to have as many candidates on the ballot from your political persuasion as possible. It's kind of an interesting way. I mentioned how this is going to change electioneering strategy. That's what I was referring to. And this is my best guess of how to win with the model that you folks are going to be experiencing this fall. There was my build. So that was the gist of what I wanted to talk to here. I wanted to leave some time for questions. I have more slides in here that talk to things about the Maine state election experience, and a little bit more about electioneering strategy and the typical RCV model, not yours, but since you're in Alaska, I figured this was a good place for me to stop and ask if there were questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bennekom. And, you know, you did point out that I mispronounced your college. Where we're located actually is the Kenai Peninsula, not the Kenai.
All right.
You know, just wanted to share that with you, just so you understand.
You want me to tell you about how you pronounce my name?
We lost your, we don't have audio for some reason.
I don't even pronounce my name right, okay? My Dutch cousins are disgusted at how I pronounce my name.
How about questions for Dr. Bennekom? My head's kind of spinning, but I'm sure a lot of you got questions. Anybody? Any questions?
And by the way, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. There's a lot of echo going on and my hearing sucks anyway. So I might ask you if there is a question to repeat it, you know, clearly into a microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Bizarre,
Okay, Diane.
but in light of Don Young's passing, what happens to a person that dies and gets votes afterwards?
Okay, the question was, in light of Representative Young dying, what happens if someone gets votes and they've died before but they're still on the ballot and they get counted?
Damned if I know. I mean, you talk about news, huh? You know, this gets to what are the rules being written by whoever writes them.
Yeah.
My belief is the way it's typically handled is if a candidate dies, they're not eliminated. It's not like you get rid of them. But, you know, look at how the rules are. Don't let somebody else write the rules.
Okay. Mark?
So is it best to have 4 Republican candidates all running?
So the question was, so is it best to have 4 Republican candidates all running? I think you addressed that a little bit, but maybe you can go over that again.
Yeah, and so my point is, sure, if you have 4 Republicans running, are you going to get all 4 through the jungle primary? No. I'm being strategic here. You're very unlikely to have the 4 Republicans all place 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if you have 3 Republicans run and only 3 conservatives, so let me phrase it that way, you'll get 1 Democrat will get through, and 3 Republicans might get through. You have a better chance of having more Republicans getting through the jungle primary the fewer you have. Ideally, you'd like to have 3 Republicans in the final election. Highly unlikely you'll get 4.
One of the things that I'm sorry, question back here. Yes, sir. You.
In a worst case scenario, if 3 Democrats are on this final ballot, would voting for the least likely Democrat to win as the second choice be a good plan?
Okay, the question was, if you ended up with 3 Democrats on the ballot and only 1 Republican, would it be good strategy to vote for the least likely Democrat to win as your second choice, as opposed to not voting for anybody's second choice?
You know, it's not going to matter. When you do the math, if you think through the scenario, and I'd have to really think through the scenario here, I don't think it's going to matter in that kind of a situation. You know, I hear people say, don't make a second choice vote. It dilutes your first choice vote. That's not true. You know, just think a way the process works.
One of the things that concerns me is that if you end up with a jungle primary, you could have somebody come in the top 4 of the jungle primary that might only get 5 or 10% of the total vote in the primary, and they could in fact win somehow or another, the way this goofy system works. Is that possible?
Absolutely. In fact, with the ranked choice voting, when you get there, the person who finishes not last, but the 3rd place finisher in a ranked choice of 4 could wind up winning the ultimate election based upon the second choice votes. That was an example I had on my website that Kathy very nicely corrected for me.
Other questions? Over here, yes, sir.
I noticed that the liberals have having, like, we're sitting here talking about strategy. They've already had them at Homer. So they obviously have a way of approaching this because they designed it to win. Has anybody gone there and seen what their actual strategy is so that we're instead of talking from our side, actually decide, well, they're trying to do this because we just watched where there was 3 Democrats and 1 Republican and it flipped. Well, most likely, I don't think they have 3 candidates for governor, but we have 3 Republicans running for governor. It just seems to be that it doesn't look like they're playing the same game with it.
Could you hear that, Dr. Bennekom?
No, please repeat.
Okay, okay. It was, the question was that the Democrats have apparently had some strategy sessions locally to talk about how they're going to work through this ranked choice voting process. And the gentleman was asking if anyone here had slipped into those meetings to see what their process was, because you could have Democrats get on there, and we currently have 3 candidates, Republican candidates for governor, and they apparently only have 1 or 2 at this point, and trying to figure out how to do some strategic thinking around that.
And isn't this the craziest thing about what this model does to you? Now you're having to think strategically about how do you get additional people on the ballot to get the right person to win. And I'll give you an example of this, and I spoke about this on the Michael Duke show. In the state of Maine in the last election cycle, Susan Collins was supposed to lose the election. She's the Republican from Maine, and all the polls showed her losing to Sarah Gideon by 5 to 10%. And yet she wound up winning by 10%, amazingly enough. So it did not get to a ranked choice voting, but there was a left of center candidate, probably a Green Party candidate, who ran specifically saying, I'm not going to win, but come and vote for me and vote for Sarah Gideon as number 2. Now, is that the way you want to run elections?
No.
But that's how you win in an RCV model. You have ideally, that's why I say, ideally you want 3 Republicans to get through the jungle primary, because you're not going to get 4. Let's be realistic. And if you have 3 Republicans in the final election, each of them are going to have their own constituencies and bring their own people out to vote. Conversely, if you had 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, those 3 Democrats are bringing their constituencies out, which obviously as a Republican you don't want. So, it really changes the way you do your electioneering. And I think it's perverse.
So would it be if you had, let's say you had a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, and a libertarian on the ballot? Would it make sense then for the Republican candidate to try to identify as closely as possible with the independent or the libertarian to pick up some of those votes as a second choice vote?
Yes, and this is the positive argument about ranked choice voting, is that the extremes from the 2 parties don't wind up contesting in the general election. It forces the candidates to make nice, if you will, with a more center of the road candidate, or the other the voters who would vote for the other candidates. So it creates a little bit of coalitions. And so that argument that you put out there, yeah, if the Republican would want to run, try to form an alliance, if you will, with the Libertarian candidate, who would probably be to the right of center generally. In Minnetonka, Minnesota, they just used RCV for the first time, and they actually had candidates running as a slate, even though there was only 1 office. But the Republicans openly collaborated. They did handouts saying, here's the order in which you should vote. So, we got to think very strategically, and tactically here.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Could he go over again the reason why ballots were disqualified? Because that to me scares me more than the ballots, that is checked, but why? Why
Okay.
were they disqualified?
Dr. Bennekom, the question was, can you repeat or go over again the reasons why ballots were disqualified?
Sure. I'm going to pull up the slide that I think is relevant here. This, in general, I'm not a fan of PowerPoint, but this is where it does make sense here. This was my slide looking at the round 2 candidates that were disqualified. So actually, I'm going to go back one slide here. There were, when we looked at the first place votes, there were this number 4,600 plus or 6,400 plus votes were eliminated looking at the first choices on the ballot. 435 people did not make a first choice vote. 6,000 people, 435 people voted for more than one person for first choice, and 6,000 people didn't vote for anyone at all for this office. So those people were disqualified. That's how we got from the 296 down to the 289 and change. And then when we went into the second round, there were 23,427 ballots that came into the second round from Tiffany Bond and Bill Hoare, the 16,000 and the 6,800. That totals out to the 2,300, or pardon me, that I'm screwing myself up here by talking about this. Nope, that's the 2,300. So there were 2,300 ballots came into the second round. Of those 2,300, 8,253 were disqualified because of undervotes and overvotes. So here are the 8,200 ballots that were disqualified in the second round. 98 of those ballots, and again, this is people who voted for Bill Hoare and Jessica Bond as their first choice, and now we're looking at their second choice options. 98 of those people voted for 2 candidates in the second choice. So that's an overvote. They're booted out. 7,800 did not make a second choice vote at all. So they didn't make a second choice. We can't infer a second choice. And then 335 people voted for Bill Hoare and the eliminated candidates. Some candidate who has been eliminated, they had as their second choice. That's what's known as an exhausted choice. So that's how we get to the ballot disqualification.
Thank you for going over that again. I think that the thing that concerns me about that is that some of those decisions are going to be made rather arbitrarily by the whoever's looking at the ballots and counting them.
Well, you might. Do you have machines count them?
Yes.
So now the question comes up with, what about mismarked ballots?
Yeah. Jeff?
Does Massachusetts have a way where you know if your ballot got counted? I mean, when you vote, if you get results,
They,
you go to the result and say, oh, yeah, I voted, and they did count it.
okay, he was
Or was it thrown out?
he was showing Maine, not Massachusetts, but okay, the question was, does Maine have a way of tracking your ballot that you can see that you voted a certain way and that it was in fact counted that way?
No, because then you wouldn't have secrecy. It wouldn't be a private ballot. I mean, right now, I could pull up the spreadsheet that shows you all the votes. I could pull that up for you right now. I'd have to go find it in my files, but you can find it yourself out on the State of Maine website.
We have several more questions here, but we're gonna have to cut it off. We've got time limit restrictions and I'm sorry, we're gonna have to stop. Dr. Bennekom, thank you very much for taking your Saturday to spend with us. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's raining and miserable here, so it was a good day for me to be sitting in front of a computer screen.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
don't want this.